Hello, welcome back. And we're going to continue with part three. But what I want to tell you about part two is that you may as well just assume that John Keel's personality is mine at this point. I've read enough of his work for long enough. I've examined enough of what he's said. I've listened to him talk enough that for a while of my life, I very much was intentionally adopting his personality. I find him to be a fascinating man, even if he's absolutely full of shit, because his method works. That's the thing. His method works. And if there's efficacy, there's evidence, effectively. Part 3 of Chapter 1. There is an old house on a tree-lined street in New York's Greenwich Village which harbors a strange ghost. Hans Holzer and other ghost chasers have included the house in their categories of haunted places. The phantom has been seen by several people in recent years. It is dressed in a long black cape and wears a wide-brimmed slouch hat pulled down over its eyes as it slinks from room to room. Self-styled parapsychologists have woven all kinds of fantasies around this apparition. Obviously, a spy from the Revolutionary War was caught and killed in the old house. But wait, this ghost may not be a member of the Restless Dead at all. There were never any reports of hauntings there until about 20 years ago, after the house was vacated by a writer named Walter Gibson. He was, and is, an extraordinarily prolific author. For many years he churned out a full-length novel each month, and many of those novels were written in the house in Greenwich Village. All of them were centered around the spectacularly successful character Gibson created in the 1930s, that nemesis of evil known as the Shadow. If you have read any of the Shadow novels, you know that he was fond of lurking in dark alleys dressed in a cape and broad-brimmed slouch hat. Why would a shadow-like apparition suddenly appear in an old house? Could it be some kind of residue from Walter Gibbons's very powerful mind? We do know that some people can move objects, even bend spoons and keys with the power of their minds alone. Mental telepathy is now a tested and verified phenomenon. So Keel writes, that we can argue about that if we really wanted to. And about 10% of the population have the ability to see above and beyond the narrow spectrum of visible light. They can see radiations and even objects invisible to the rest of us. And we could argue about that too, Keel. A very large part of the UFO lore is, in fact, based upon the observations of such people. What seems normal to them seems abnormal, even ridiculous, to the rest of us. People who see ghosts of the wandering shadow have these abilities. They are appearing at forms that are always there, always present around us, like radio waves, and when certain conditions exist, they can see these things. The Tibetans believe that advanced human minds can manipulate these invisible energies into visible forms called tulpas, or thought projections. Did Walter Gibson's intense concentration on his shadow novels inadvertently bring a tulpa into existence? Unlikely. What's more likely is that people see it there knowing that. Readers of occult literature know there are innumerable cases of ghosts haunting a particular site year after year, certainly after a century, carrying out the same mindless activities endlessly. Build a house on such a site and the ghost will leave locked doors ajar as it marches through to carry out its programmed activity. Could these ghosts really be tulpas? Residues of powerful minds like the phantom and the broad-brimmed hat. Next, consider this. UFO activity is concentrated in the same areas year after year. In the Ohio Valley, they show a penchant for the ancient Indian mounds which stand throughout the area. Could some UFOs be mere tulpas created by a long-forgotten people and doomed forever to senseless maneuvers in the night skies? There are archaeological sites in the Mississippi Valley, which have been dated to 8,000 years ago, long before the Indians are supposed to have arrived. Some of the Indian mounds, there are hundreds of them scattered throughout North America, are laid out and constructed with the same kind of mathematical precision found in the pyramids of Egypt. While it is known that the Indians were still adding to some of the mounds in the south when the Europeans first arrived, other mounds seem to be considerably older. Some are built in the form of elephants. What did the builders use for a model? Others are in the shape of sea serpents. These forms can only be seen from the air. To plan and build such mountains of shaped earth required technical skills beyond the simple nomadic woods Indians. And now here's the thing. You want a hypothesis about what that is? Because I know you want a hypothesis about why that is. Why in South America the Nazca lines? Why all this stuff that can only be seen from the air? It's because when you meditate deeply and you go into a trance state, you can enter an out of body state and you can literally see out of the eyes of eagles from that distance looking down on yourself. You get to enjoy it. Those are for the shamans to look down and see something beautiful that his people are doing because they don't have anything else to fucking do. That's what that stuff is. And I don't know, I'm in Ohio, and the mound stuff in Ohio, as a person who lives here, is deeply occulted. They don't want you playing around or knowing what any of that is. The state of Ohio doesn't. The state of Ohio came after Graham Hancock for trying to go to Serpent Mound and just look at Serpent Mound as a tourist. The Archaeological Society of Ohio, or whatever the fuck it's called, actually has him all tied up in lawsuits over it right now. Currently, there is a revival in diffusionism, a popular scientific concept of the 1920s, which asserted that many of the puzzling artifacts and ancient constructions found throughout the world were the products of a single worldwide culture. The cult of believers in Atlantis were the principal advocates of this idea, so sober scientists naturally turned away from it for a theory that is almost impossible to support. This was the notion that many inventions and ideas simply occurred simultaneously to widespread, isolated cultures. And so now we know what Graham Hancock was reading. I read all my Graham Hancock after I read John Keel, so I didn't realize how much of Graham Hancock's last 20 or 30 years or whatever it's been ripping off the last 30 years or 40 years or whatever that was of Keel. So whatever. The flying saucer entities. That's why he's constantly checking himself. Graham Hancock is constantly checking himself so that he doesn't sound like an ancient aliens person. And the reason he's doing that is because he's ripped all of this from John Keel, who's not trying to make an ancient aliens argument, but he's also not trying to make an anti-ancient aliens argument. So there's just so much theft in this community. That's why I like Keel. That made me mad. Currently, there is a revival in diffusionism, a popular scientific concept of the 1920s, which asserted that many of the puzzling artifacts and ancient constructions found throughout the world were the products of a single worldwide culture. The cult of believers in Atlantis were the principal advocates of this idea, so sober scientists naturally turned away from it for a theory that is almost impossible to support. This was the notion that many inventions and ideas simply occurred simultaneously to widespread, isolated cultures. We do know that's wrong. The simultaneous, almost coincidental spread of technology, that didn't happen. We know now, 50 years after this book was written, that didn't happen. But that's still taking time to filter into the publications, to the scientific publications. They do not want to believe that there was a super society that came out of the time before the Ice Age. They just don't want to believe it. There were floods of the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean rose like crazy about 13,000 years ago. There was a hypothesized island continent called Lemuria in the Pacific that was absolutely there. It was absolutely there. We have evidence that it was there, that it sunk. The entire continent just under the water. The water raced enough that it's just under the water now. Lemuria is real between Madagascar and India. That's real. So the idea that there could have been no other large island chain or nothing like the Caribbean out in the middle of the Atlantic where there's just nothing is silly, especially when what are those called? Satellite images of Antarctica show that at least one of the island landmasses, well, at least one of the landmasses of Antarctica used to not be that far south. That the island itself drifted all the way to the bottom of the planet. the continent itself. Parts of that continent drifted down to where they are now. Why couldn't that have been Atlantis, and why couldn't that have been a land bridge people that were good at sailing, that spread technology around the world, and then that technological spread got trapped in what's it called, in anachronistic stories that just didn't understand history, and they just didn't understand 13,000 years ago. You don't understand 13,000 years ago. I can't even comprehend the 40 years I've been alive, let alone 10,000 of them. Especially when you think that like 19,000 of those, nothing fucking happened. Nothing really happened. Like Rome, it doesn't matter that it happened. It's not important that Rome happened, that Greece happened, that China happened. Like Mohenjo-Daro, everything could be Mohenjo-Daro. Just wasted, just lost in a jungle somewhere. Ruins is what I meant to say, not wasted. Everything could be that way. We have no way of knowing. 10,000 years is long enough to erode steel. In 10,000 years, our skyscrapers aren't going to be there. There's going to be absolutely no evidence. The only way in 10,001 years that archaeologists will know that New York City was ever like it is from silicate. They'll have to test the soil for iron particulate. There's no way of knowing. It'll be all gone. All of it. 10,000 years is long enough that all of it is gone. So if there was a mega civilization on the southern hemisphere, which was hot and not cold, but it was made out of wood, there'd be no cultural memory of it, and we'd have no way of finding it. Almost no way of finding it. And we won't dig in Africa. They already found a village that's like 300. No, they found a burial site that's 300,000 years old. The Nalani site, it's not even human. It's not even meaningfully human. Those are not Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens are not 300,000 years old. Those are significantly older, and they were doing a lot of human things before our species even existed, before we'd even speciated, before we'd even specialized enough to need to speciate. And that's in Africa. I think there was a village of wood, and it was huge, that they recently found that was 30 or 40,000 years ago. So even 10,000, even just a couple hundred years ago, we would have no way of finding an abandoned village of wood. It'd just be gone. The only way we would know is the post holes. The only way you can know. Even of stone, castles now. When they go to sites that were supposed to have castles, the only thing they can look for is the foundation holes. Not even the foundations. Humans are smart. We're smart enough not to leave any usable building materials to waste. That would be insane. We're not dumb. We're just evil. Okay, so we go back. The flying saucer entities have allegedly contacted many people in almost every country and have immodestly claimed credit for everything from the building of the pyramids to the sinking of Atlantis. Erich von Däniken, a Swiss author, has popularized the concept that members of an extraterrestrial civilization did contact early Earthlings, basing his theories on an expansive misinterpretations and, in several instances, deliberate misrepresentations of archaeological curiosities. Van Daniken seems to be totally ignorant of the work of European scholars such as Brinsley Trench, Paul Mizrachi, and W. Raymond Drake, who have examined the same curiosities very closely in the past 10 years and developed elaborate philosophical hypotheses about the intrusion and effect of alien beings on mankind since the beginning. Their concepts are wider in scope and significance and far better documented than Van Daniken's simplistic efforts. That unidentified flying objects have been present since the dawn of man is an undeniable fact. They are not only described repeatedly in the Bible, but were also the subject of cave paintings made thousands of years before the Bible was written, and a strange procession of weird entities and frightening creatures have been with us just as long. When you review the ancient references, you are obliged to conclude that the presence of these objects and beings is a normal condition for this planet. That is italicized. These things, these other intelligencies, he's adding agencies to intelligence for intelligencies. I don't hate it, but I won't be using it myself. Or OINTs, as Ivan Sanderson labeled them, either reside here but somehow remain concealed from us, or they do not exist at all and are actually special aberrations of the human mind. Tulpas, hallucinations, psychological constructs, momentary materializations of energy from that dimension beyond the reach of our senses and even beyond the reaches of our scientific instruments. They are not from outer space. There is no need for them to be. They have always been here. Perhaps they were here long before we started bashing each other over the head with clubs. If so, they will undoubtedly still be here long after we have incinerated our cities, polluted all the waters, and rendered the very atmosphere unbreathable. Of course, their lives, if they have lives in the usual sense, will be much duller after we have gone. But if they wait around long enough, another form of so-called intelligent life will crawl out from under a rock, and they can begin their games again. That ends part 3. I'm going to go ahead and click this here button.